Good morning from Tech Central and welcome everybody to our Modern App Dev webinar. Thanks all for joining us today as we discuss how DevOps can overcome common pitfalls in the deployment of native cloud apps. I'm going to hand over to Daniel Thom, our host and moderator for today's session.
Thanks very much, Kerry. While I was preparing for this and we looked at the invite, the platform of broken dreams, I actually thought maybe we should change it. And shattered dreams versus broken dreams, we can always bring together. So the platform of broken dreams was, Danie, your topic, and Johan, your topic. And I loved it when we thought about the Green Day song that we were talking around and the Boulevard of Broken Dreams and where it goes, because the boulevards were empty now because of COVID. And I think we're going to be talking around that today quite a bit. I love the topic. I think there's so much to learn around it. And especially as this whole development cycle with DevOps just becoming more and more to the fore, people are not even expecting, it's not even a ticket to the game. But there are certainly many ways to deliver this, but there's only few ways to get it right. And that's what we want to talk around today. I want to introduce our two panelists. Johan comes from the business side, from a Red Hat perspective, and is looking after teams within and the structure and the strategy of where these teams are going. Danie comes more from a technical perspective and is an architect and moved his way through development. And together they make a formidable team that's advising customers on the way forward that they can take their development and their development teams into this new digital era. So we've said the Boulevard of Broken Dreams, but we're talking about the pitfalls of app development, and we're talking about good intentions that go awry. And I've seen some horror stories where people think digital transformation is we design an app. Johan, why do you support that topic, platform of broken dreams?
Dan, it's a very good question. We talk to a lot of customers and, it's more than just looking at a specific technology. So as I said, a couple of times talking to people, we go out, we sit down and we get into containerization, Kubernetes, and that type of thing. And then we sort of have to stop people and say, okay, let's just pause. Obviously, there's business priorities behind this as well. And that is an enabler. So those technologies are enabling you to be the next thing. But what's important to your business today? And I'm going to sort of put it in three buckets, and I'm going to sort of make it just a bit more generic because it depends on the type of business you're in. It is obviously to make money, to save money, and mitigate risk. Now, you can go along in those three areas, and you can actually go and broker it out, say, I need to deliver investor value. I want to give the best experience to my customers so I can actually grow my market share. And then we get to the second one, where we always basically have to turn back and say, look, I have to do more with less. And then the last one is we all want to mitigate risk as clients.
So basically what you're saying is that people forget those fundamentals. And that's why we result in these project failures. And we've seen some epic project failures over the years.
Absolutely. So I'll also hand over to Danie to sort of get a bit into the technical side of it, and especially, on some of the technologies. Danie, if you want to.
Exactly like you said, Johan, you mentioned those three things, those three fundamentals that we have. So it's the mitigate risk, decrease cost, and increase revenue. But one of the other things that I see coming through quite often these days with customers is customer experience being the fourth pillar within this, and really building out customer experience and making sure that customers are engaged and happy working with your platforms and that you are relevant back to the customer, because that ultimately drives back into that revenue statement, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's quite important. But yeah, from a technology platform perspective, we've been doing this for quite a few years now, and we've actually seen what works and what doesn't work in many cases. So I think we've been able to get some good experience now with a lot of customers in not just South Africa, but Sub-Sahara Africa as a region. And there's definitely different drivers in different contexts that is important with it.
So you think that a lot of people have started with the great intentions, they've read what's on the box, and then they kyk noord and they revert back to what they've been doing anyway, which is traditional IT just with new tools. If we start at the beginning, how do you think we arrived at where we are now? And out of 10, Danie, I'm going to ask you, as a generalization, where do you think the majority of IT teams are? 10 being we've embraced this digitization across the organization and we're customer focused. 1 being please don't speak to IT. We're busy keeping the lights on and we are working. Where do you think we are? And then how did we get here in the beginning?
Again, I think context is important here. So I think different sectors, different businesses in different industries have had different levels of success with us. So I think there's been some businesses like the fintech side of things that have adopted this new way of working a lot better. So they would typically have a higher score in that scale that you mentioned. But then you've got the more traditional type businesses like manufacturing and so on. That's a little bit behind where we would normally be. And I think that's been a bit of a challenge as well. And what people do quite often when they embark on this new way of working is they go and they take one of the models that works and that's been publicized quite a lot. Something like, for example, the Spotify model. And they say, well, let's take the Spotify model because that worked and let's go implement it into our environment as an example, and then let's use that. That's going to be the way that we're going to get DevOps working within the environment. And the challenge is that doesn't work for the context and where they are in their journey. And then they have typically trouble and failures and issues that come up. And ultimately, these things then fail. And then you fall back to your old way of working and you start working with that. That's just the human behavior, right? People don't like change. And if the change doesn't work, that's even worse.
Yeah, so we see these things out of our industry. We try and adopt them inside our industry, but we don't understand the fundamentals that have gone into that. And I think that that value gap is often not breached. And is that the role that the partners and the vendors should be playing, Johan?
Daniel, absolutely. I think from what we've seen and what is happening out there is you as a business person, you understand your business really well. Well, you should. Let's put it that way if you want to be successful. So from our view as a vendor, we are basically saying for you as a business owner, focus on what is important to you to get to that next level, that agility, that next level, app that you want to develop to grab more market share. And let us as a vendor help you with the rest. Let's help you build up from the ground up, put a strong foundation in and get all the plumbing together and deliver a platform to you that will make it easier for you to move forward and focus on what you need to do, not get stuck in the weeds. And unfortunately, where we are now, there's a lot of people that get stuck in the weeds. So we've got to focus on, digital transformation means I need to go and do containerization. That's some of the stuff we're getting, which is not true. Digital transformation actually starts at company culture level. And then going down from that point, let's work together as a company and how can we get those common goals together as teams to drive this forward. So yes, definitely, we can assist by saying, we can help you on the foundation to get this right, to build all the pieces in between, to give you that platform that you can use as a springboard to get those next levels apps out the door.
So I know we're going off piste here, but I want to carry on there. Johan, do you think the buying cycle that we're experiencing in South Africa allows for vendors and partners to share that expertise? And the cycle I'm talking around is have requirement, issue RFP, get 15 responses, choose the cheapest one, and then start the project. Do you think that still works in today's customer-centric need value gap meeting through the development? Or do you think we need to find a new way of buying the software solutions?
It is a difficult question to answer. Obviously, you need to go through your governance, and as companies need to go through procurement cycle and governance to make sure that everything is followed. But I want to sort of change that around. You need strategic partners. Now, there's a difference between a vendor-customer relation and a partner-customer relation. When you're a strategic partner, you're there with your customer and helping them get to the next level. So that's an indirect answer to your question. So I believe there needs to be change. So you have to go through that process to say, I need to get the correct strategic partners to align to my business goals. And then they got a seat at the table to help you drive forward towards the next steps. So there needs to be a bit of a change in the approach and saying, we have to go through all the steps to make sure we get the right people involved as those partners and strategic partners.
So just a free bit of comment to our delegates is that look at a set of partners that aren't worried contract to contract, but are looking at an extended period and that can absorb your business and make that a priority, because the development cycles are different, the tools are different, and the thinking needs to be different. I think that's really wise, Johan. Danie, there's a lot of myths when it comes through the modern app delivery and development and cloud native platforms. What are some of the stumbling blocks that people hang on to these myths? They think they've arrived. Where are these around development?
So I think there's really three main myths that I see quite often with customers that we see when we speak to them. And the first one that they typically come back with is containers is enough in this digital transformation journey. Now, if I've implemented containers, I'm now digitally transformed and I've got this new way of working and everything is going to work, right? So,
yay, we've got containers. We use APIs. Yes, we're digitally transferred. Okay, yeah.
Exactly. So that's really the starting point of this. And I think the problem there is the fact that we as vendors have perpetuated that problem as well, because we were selling containers as vendors to customers over the last few years. But it's not the answer. It's not the ultimate end goal within this, right? So we have to help customers to understand that containers is great. It's bringing a lot of capability and a lot of new functionality that you can use. But that's not the end game that you're on here. That's just the way that you're going to package your application, ultimately, to take it into production. So you've got to think about that. If you get your head around that first part of it, that, containers might not be the answer, number one, and it might not be the answer for everything, you're in a good space already. You don't just containerize everything and off you go. I think the second myth that I see also quite often that people push in as well is, Kubernetes is the answer. So, okay, containers at scale didn't work, but well, let's go introduce Kubernetes. That's
yay, we've got Kubernetes. We've got now we're done. Now we've used everything. We're done. Okay,
we are now at the forefront. We knew, we're well away. And the problem there is Kubernetes is just a tool. It's not supposed to be this over-encompassing application that you've got built, or this platform that you've got built. It's a tool in a tool chain that you've created. It's part of a platform that you're creating. It's a great tool. It's a great orchestrator, but that's all that it was really designed to do. So don't think about you've arrived if you've deployed Kubernetes. You still need to do a bit more work around what it is that you're going to be doing. And I think what Johan was saying earlier is quite important. Culture, processes, the way that you develop, the way that you take these applications into production, that's where the key lies with us as well. And then I think the third part of it is that application platforms is enough. So now we've gone containers, then we take containers to scale at Kubernetes, and then we deploy application platform, and now we're done.
Yeah,
that's absolutely also not the case. You need to do a lot more when you get to that application platform point, and you need to start building out, again, the tools, the processes, the people, the culture to actually apply this new modern way of developing and deploying applications. It's all about modern application development, deployment, and delivery, ultimately. Because if it hasn't happened in production, it hasn't happened, right? You have to make sure that whatever the work is that you're doing leads up to production.
Absolutely. Johan, do you want to add anything to that?
Just adding to what Danie said. Obviously, if we look at adoption rates, we look at a bit of stats now. If we look at adoption rate of containers, and this is to Danie's point, we can see there's a huge adoption rate in containers. We can see there's a huge adoption rate in Kubernetes. But still, if we look at the levels of those technologies still in development, it is into that trap that we've taken technologies on with not the end goal in mind. And we've actually haven't gone through the other process to make sure we've aligned everything, to get everything going again, to get those apps quick out. So I think if I just recall just from a stat that they say typically on customers, they've surveyed 37% of customers out there still in development phase of this. Getting to grips of containers and Kubernetes, is the buzzword out there. So I concur with what Danie is definitely saying. So it's getting out of that. And I'll go back to that point I said earlier to you is, we want to help people to say, focus on your business. We can help you to get to these points by enabling you through those levels. And it's not only a technology discussion. This is
definitely
sitting around the table and discussing with customers, what's your business priorities? What is important to you? And then we backfit it to technology. Start with the end goal in mind and then go through the processes, get all the teams involved, get them all aligned, and then go through the process and say, okay, now, right, the technologies that we should be looking at to achieve these are the following.
And really, isn't that why organizations have tapped into now the fourth myth? We've taken agile and our development is just going to smash it through here because we're putting business together with IT and we should be focused on an outcomes-based effort. Danie, have you seen a widespread uptake of this, and whether we put it under the Agile banner or we just say business sitting with IT, are you seeing more and more of that in our customers? And is it effective? Are those barriers to communication between the people who are developing and the people who need coming down effectively?
There's definitely pockets where this is happening, right? So there's definitely organizations that I can say, these guys are really getting more and more mature in this process, and they're actually really building a proper Agile and DevOps culture within their business where they understand the business priorities before they actually go and they do anything. And also, like you said, operations and business and developers all sit together around the same table and they understand the common goal that they're driving towards. So you do get those pockets, and it's becoming more and more prevalent now with organizations. A lot more people are starting to do this, right? But like Johan said, there's all of these other organizations that are still in a development phase, just trying to grapple with the concepts of what is a container and what is Kubernetes and all of these other kinds of things. And they're still not at that point where they understand the real benefit that they can unlock by going into a proper Agile platform.
So they know enough to be dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah. Johan, are you finding C-levels putting money behind the transformation? Because I want to go to the thesis that Hemu sent us in the chat and just make reference to that. And this costs money. This transformation costs money. It costs time and it costs effort. Are you seeing people willing to put the checkbook down for the stuff which is not just buying the licenses to use containers and Kubernetes? Are they putting the peripherals around it, or are we still struggling with the justification?
So I think we're still struggling with the justification. So just from my side, and then I'll hand over to Johan, because it's been a big challenge for people to understand that journey that they're on. And that's really been the big thing, because it's a journey that they're on, and it's not just something that you pull out a checkbook and you say, okay, let me buy /DevOps SKU and off I go, and everything has been done. But there's definitely more and more customers that are starting to understand that they need to actually put money down for this, and they're starting to do that. Most of the customers that I speak to these days understand that this is a cost that they're going to do, but the benefit and the return on investment that they're going to get from it is going to be a lot more.
Johan?
Dan, absolutely. If you do it the right way, and I think both myself and Danie have sort of alluded to the fact where it starts. So there's a lot of digital transformation discussions out there, and there's a way and approach. So to your question, what you asked me, is CIO, the C-levels putting effort behind it? Absolutely. Because our markets are changing dramatically. The way we buy goods, the way we, Uber, if we look at Uber for argument's sake, they don't own their own taxi, but yet they deliver a service, Airbnb, all those guys. So the market is transforming and people need to keep pace with that. Now, we've seen, and we're not going to name and shame because that will give us into trouble, but we've seen customers taking a couple of stabs at this. In the greater region, we've seen people get this right at the third stab at it or second stab at it. And it's difficult. If you make a mistake and you go down the road and you're on this road, the worst thing you can do is try and stay on that road. And it's, you can see there's no more road, but you still have to keep on going with your car. Things are going to start breaking. The encouraging bit is where people take a step back and saying, look, this is not working for us. We need to look at it again, and we need to look at it properly. And I keep on circling back to the business priorities aligning to IT, and CIOs' roles are also changing in the market now. They've got a high percentage business focus opposed to I'm just looking after the infrastructure. It's getting through that and saying, pulling up the handbrake, let's take a step back. And in some of those environments, the quicker you do that, the quicker you can get to the next level. If you keep
it's a brave man that does that, though.
Yeah, and we've seen a couple of people. It is. And for me, that's the good thing for CIO to say, look, we've made a decision, or CX level IT management, we've made a decision it's not working for the business. We need to relook at it. It takes I don't know if I need to say it, but you know what I want to say. It takes.
That is a great segue into what Hemu said in the chat, that digital transformation is by no means limited to only 3 drivers. And there's a lot in there. But the one I'd like to talk around is strategic unity. And strategic unity means, in my mind, in my language, is pulling in the same direction towards the same goal, having different jobs under our responsibilities. And Danie, I feel that we see this Field of Dreams, which, as my 14-year-old says, was the second most boring movie she's ever watched, where I cried through it. They've got this Field of Dreams, build it and the crowds will come. Does it really, is that how transformation happens?
Unfortunately, I think the reality of that is that is not the way that it happens typically, right? I've had many customers where we speak to the operations teams and they say, don't worry, we'll build this platform. We'll make sure everything is cool and everything works. And then the application developers will just bring their workloads and it'll just be this magic platform that's been built. And I unfortunately haven't seen any of those really successful deployments ultimately, because that's not the way that it works. You've got to get the developers to be excited about the platform and to become productive. That's really what it boils down to, because if they can drive the need for the platform, that's where the important thing comes in. So typically where these things have been successful is if you reorganize your teams into a more cross-functional team setup, and the ops people understands the requirements from the dev people a lot better, and you can bring in QA and testing and all of these other groups of people into those same teams, and you can have the business owners part of that team as well. Now you can start driving what the need is a lot better, so that when you build the platform, it actually is fit for business purpose. It actually is the enabler
fit for customer purpose.
Absolutely.
Surely, I mean, that's Johan's nodding emphatically there. Where does the customer sit in this if we're just building this? So this separation, doesn't it keep the containerization separation? Doesn't this keep the developers' world sacrosanct so they're on their own? Do you think the containerization and ability to use containerization is exacerbating these walls between, or is it helping ease the communication gaps?
So I think from a technology perspective, you can almost think of these two different worlds, like you've called them now, the developers and the operations teams, and the separation that you've got there. We normally talk about something called the wall of confusion that's erected between these two sides, right? So devs and ops don't talk the same language. They're typically different species of IT people, right? And they don't understand this. If you build the culture and the processes and the technology in the right way, you can break down that wall of confusion, and you can almost have this middle part, which is the platform that you're creating, to actually become the clutch between what's happening on the development side of things and what's happening in the operation side of things. And you bring those two teams closer together, because all of a sudden, when the ops teams understand more of what the developers are trying to do, they can add value quicker in the supply chain that's being created, and they can actually start doing that. So that's really the key, I think.
So we had a question there from Megan, who is saying lack of communication between the development and testing QA teams is our top concern. So we're talking about rapid development. We've got developers that are throwing code out or throwing features and functions out. And then the dev and testing team, which is not communicating effectively to each other. This leads to security errors. How can we improve this continuous integration with better continuous testing and ensure collaboration?
I think from my point of view, we have to get the company culture in the same space. So it has to become a culture. It needs to come from, I would say, top-down culture and organization to say we collaborate to make things better or to get to a better result as an organization, to align with where we need to go, customer experience and all that type of stuff. So it's a cultural change, first of all, before we even talk to, use this tool or whatever. So people need to understand that if we sit together in a room and everyone has got their important piece to contribute towards that process. And sometimes it's the guy sitting in the corner that comes up with the best idea for us to collaborate together. So if we get all the key stakeholders together in that room and we thrash it out and say, look, our culture is to collaborate, and anyone's idea flies or the best idea wins, in the team, that already creates a bit of an ease with that communication between the teams, because immediately you are sort of knowing that, look, we bring it up, we get into the room, we put a couple of things on the board, we figure out what we need to do, who's best at doing that, and how we can go through the whole process the quickest and most agile way. And then I'll hand back to Danie to add some technology stuff into there.
I think it would be a good segue to talk around DevOps and the 4 Rs. Danie, what is that? You mentioned that to us in the prep, and I wouldn't mind just revisiting that, because that talks around how we get this cultural change.
Sure. So there's a very interesting book that was written by two great DevOps gentlemen, and the book is called Team Topologies. And the thesis of that book is you need to organize your teams within your IT shop in such a way that they can actually develop the applications correctly, because the application architecture is a direct result of the formation of the team. So the way that the team has been set up will determine what the architecture will look like of the application that you push ultimately. And that's not a new thing. That's a law that has been defined since the 1960s. So really an old concept that is still very true today as well. And what the guys in the Team Topologies book actually say is that when you set up these teams in the correct way, ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the developers to be as productive as possible, and you're trying to take the cognitive load that they would typically have trying to understand how to deploy the application and how to set up the application, how to set up the environment and all of these kinds of things. You take away all of that cognitive load and they don't have to worry about that any longer. They've got a standardized tool set that they use to build. And you bring in all the security checks and everything else into that mix as well, so that it is part of the development cycle from the beginning. So that when the developers code and they develop their applications, they also develop the functional tests and the security tests that needs to test the code that they are pushing into their repositories. So at the point that the developers are pushing the code into the repositories, into their Git repos that they've got created, all of these tests can start kicking in, and these tests can run these bulk pipelines that will then allow the application to be promoted through the different stages automatically without the developer having to worry about where that goes and how that does. So all the logic should be part of the platform that you're creating. And then the developer should just be left to be able to do this in a lot better way. Now, bring in the security guys from the beginning, let them explain that security context from the beginning so that the developers are aware of it, and then you can start pushing it out.
So now that's good in theory and that's good on paper. In this work from anywhere world, we've got developers that are sitting everywhere. We've got business analysts that are sitting everywhere. Heaven forbid you try and sell like me and meet new people. Tyler has asked an incredibly pertinent question, which is, who do you think should drive the bridging of the gap between business and technical in a company? Do you think that this is a missing crossover role, or should business or technical drive the engagement? So the first is there a need to drive the bridge, or is that a myth that Tyler is perpetuating? I don't think so, Tyler. I'm on your side, but I've got to ask it. And then who do you think it sits with? Is it techie? Is it business? Or is it a new role that's come through?
From what we are seeing, the CIO's role is actually getting a bit more business orientated, and the CIO is actually getting more into that, let's bridge the gap between business and the team and getting them together. So that is definitely, yes, to answer the question, we believe there is someone that needs to be driving it. Where we are seeing that's happening with slow change is the CIO is taking more of that up in the business side of things.
Okay.
I think the important thing is, so we have a concept within Red Hat that we follow, which is called the open organization. And it's actually a reference architecture or a methodology that we helped create, and we open sourced the whole idea behind the open organization as well. And really the idea is that you change the organizational model for decision making from a top-down approach to a bottom-up approach. So the idea is that you empower the technical teams to make their own decisions and to self-organize, because that's one of the important agile principles, right? Is self-organizing teams will typically be more productive. And really what we do within Red Hat, and we're a company that is located across 104 different countries, so we can do this remotely quite easily because our teams can self-organize. What is important is that you need to have the tools available to allow that online collaboration to happen. So it's not just good enough to have email and web chats and these kinds of things. There's other collaboration tools that you need to start bringing into the mix as well in this new disconnected world to bring in and to get the productivity working. But it's really changing the model around, not having the strategy being driven from the top down and everybody needs to implement it, because that typically doesn't provide the capability. It's bringing a groundswell from the bottom, bringing the momentum up. Of course, the C-level executives will make the strategic decisions about what the market requires for them to do, but it should be left up to the technical teams to actually develop the solutions that will meet that strategic goal.
In the preparation, I was saying that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the pitfalls of this, and nobody laughs as much as when they see their neighbor fall off the wall. And that's why we watch Formula One. We understand that, or maybe not our panelists, but I do. We look for the car crashes. Is there hope The road to good intentions of digital transformation and modernization is scattered with people that have really had a hard time with this. Jobs have been lost, reputations ruined. Is there hope for the organization who wants to modernize right now, right today in our environment?
Absolutely, Dan. There's hope. And it sort of boils back to, I sound like a bit of a stuck record on this. We, as an organization, will allow you to focus on your business, and we'll deliver the platform, the tools, the methodologies, and the services to help you get through this. So there's definitely still hope for those guys that, that's sort of saying, where to from here? What do we need to do? Where do we go? So definitely.
And yourself, Danie, is there hope? How do we get back on track?
So I definitely think there's hope. And, the sooner organizations can start with that, the better, because this is going to be a journey that they'll be on. Coming back to what you were saying about things that have failed within this, if you look at what Gartner says about digital transformation exercises, about 70% of these exercises typically fail. So you'll definitely find a lot more examples of failures than you will of success within this. But if you organize yourself correctly and if you drive this correctly, you can be part of that 30% success rate within this as well. And that becomes the high-performing companies. I think Johan mentioned a few of them, Uber and Google and Amazon. And, all of these kinds of companies come to mind that have all gone through this exercise to stay relevant to their customers and to be able to do this. So absolutely, there's definitely hope for organizations that they can make this work. But they have to just take a step back and just understand the context, where they are now, choose a way of working that will make sense to take them forward, and then have the discipline to apply that, even if the going gets tough and even if they make mistakes, because they will make mistakes. There will be errors. There will be things that go wrong. But it will be the companies that can work with those problems and roll with the punches, and that can fix and be agile enough to fix the problem while in flight, if you can call it that. Those are the guys that will be successful. Those are the 30%ers that you typically see. But the problem that we see with most of these 70%ers that are failing is they hit a snag, they hit a problem, and the company isn't organized in a way that can allow them to quickly pivot to another option, or that can allow them to learn from that problem and to then change the behavior that they're going to be on. And that's really going to be the big thing. But there's absolutely hope if organizations are willing to do this.
And those methods, the recommended processes and the tools we're talking about, this is not arcane secrets that are held by a society behind closed doors. These are available to us, aren't they? I mean, where
absolutely.
do we find out?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the most basic starting point of this is the Agile Manifesto that you can go and download from the internet. If you do a web search for the Agile Manifesto, you'll find a lot of information around these guys that have created this agile way of working. And that's typically a good starting point. If you can start adopting some of those capabilities, you can start using and getting the benefits from that. But it also goes, like I said earlier, you can't just go and take one model and apply it without understanding if it's going to work in your context. So don't just go and rename your groups within your company to tribes, DevOps by DevOps, or Agile because I've now applied Agile methodology. You have to go and adapt it for your organization. Now, we talk about something called the trusted software supply chain that we drive, with our platforms. And really the idea there is it goes back to manufacturing. And if you think about the way that car manufacturers have been manufacturing their products that they take to market, they typically have warehouses and distribution centers where the different individual parts and components of those vehicles are manufactured and then stored. That goes to the assembly plants. And in the assembly plants, they put these things together into a working car that they can then sell. And that then goes off to the agent that sells the car ultimately to the end user. And they can get feedback from the end user that's bought that car back through the agency into the assembly line to understand that there could be problems. And that's where the recalls and all of these other kinds of things typically comes in, from a car manufacturing perspective. So we've learned a lot of lessons from that kind of model. And we've brought that into the software supply chain as well. So the trusted software supply chain is pretty much the same idea. It's taking those raw components that you would have, the individual components, and this would be open source libraries, and it would be a bunch of different technology sets that's already there. You bring that into your assembly plant, which is this digital platform that we speak about, that could be in the cloud, it could be on-premise, it could be whatever, a container, whatever it is. And you develop that and you assemble that into a meaningful product that you take to market. and then you take it into the market space through your whatever channel is that you would typically run it with. Important thing is it has to be relevant to that end user, right? So the end user will tell you whether this thing works or doesn't work and what other features they would want to have. So you need to have a mechanism to bring it back in, that feedback that the customer is giving you. That needs to feed back into your process so that your trusted software supply chain can go and add that into the mix, and they can actually go and apply that as well.
So it's like a big blender. Business requirements come in, results come out at the end of the day, and we can get on with doing what we do, which is business. Johan, do you want to add anything to that before I ask you another real unfair question? And the unfair question is really, what does Red Hat actually do for customers on this journey? How do you help?
Okay, so I'm going to leave Danie's point there. I just wanted to add another point onto that. For management, for the management layer, as Danie said, it starts at the bottom up, a bubble up process. But getting back to that culture, there's our previous CEO, Jim Whitehurst, for those people like to read on the management side, wrote a book called The Open Organization, because we've been living, breathing this methodologies and open organization and sharing of knowledge from the lowest level up as an organization for the last 20 years. So The Open Organization is a book by Jim Whitehurst that I can say if people want at a management level sort of get a bit of additional view into this way of open communication, it's always a good place to start. Dan, just go through your question again so I can just address it.
So how does Red Hat help folks who are struggling with this? Because we've got development, we've got operations, where do you come in open shifting and moving them forward at pace?
So there's a couple of ways we can do this. So we can obviously approach this by workshop. So we've basically got something called discovery workshops, but taking a step back. If we look at end-to-end, forget about the technology for now, and we want to help you as an organization, we've got something called the Innovation Lab experience. The Innovation Lab experiences is where we basically put people into the organization and understand what's going on at the moment, and getting to that first level of planning sessions to sort of say, well, let's break the barriers down. We get all the stakeholders involved in this, and we start the process with them, with the open methodologies. So that's before we talk technology. That's just on the process side of things. Once we've gone through that, then we can get into the next levels and saying, okay, prototyping, putting a little proof of concept together and all of that to show the business, okay, we've gone through all of this and this is the outcome of this. So Danie, anything else you want to add on to that?
I think you've covered that, Johan. I think the important thing is the fact that we do this as a collaborative exercise. If you think about what we do is we apply open source principles to the engagements that we have with our customers as well, right? Because we live and breathe open source methodology within Red Hat, and we've been very successful with it because we're an enterprise software company, but we follow open source standards for development. We understand how to bridge that gap quite well. And I think one of the key things about Red Hat as an organization is, we've been a company that has been out in the market for the last 27 odd years. We've always been relevant to our organizations, and we've also been able to adapt to market conditions, and we've been able to take products to market over that 27 years that has been relevant to customers. So we've included and added things into our portfolio and sometimes also taken things away out of our portfolio just simply because of that. And we've been so successful that we were the biggest software acquisition of all times, right? So we are a typical example of where this can actually work. And we bring that knowledge to our customers, and we help our customers to understand how do we actually do it, and let us teach you how you can do it.
So the delegates that are listening here, they don't have to be experts in containerization. They don't have to be experts yet to come and chat. You have guides that can take them through this journey. And I'm going to ask you my 3 wrap-up questions. I'm going to be asking you some advice for the people listening. But the message that I've just taken from both of you is that Red Hat can take a division, a department, a requirement, and take you through the methodology so that you can almost get a lighthouse in the organization. You don't have to rip and replace everything because your legacy is still going to stay there. And I know it's probably my last question is, what about the megalophilips and the dinosaurs in the organization? Do we just ignore them, or how do we wrap them around this digital transformation in your mind?
Dan, from my side is we bring them into the conversation. And there's still methods of integrating into legacy systems. We all need to be aware this is not a magic wand and all of a sudden everything changes in our data center in the background. We're still going to have applications that's going to be legacy that we need to cater for. But the good news is it can be catered for. And to understand those will be part of the process, obviously.
And you have a cloud migration strategy. So if we're taking an app and we want to take workloads into the cloud, do you have a methodology that folk can jump onto? And what about an app? Do you have something that folks can latch onto, evaluate the app, the relevance in the new market, and then taking it to the cloud? There was a question we had in the chat, in the discussion.
So I think, first of all, the methodology, absolutely, we have a methodology that exists to help customers to modernize their applications. The whole idea behind this is, we can come and do an analysis of the applications that's currently installed within the organizations. We can see which ones are good candidates for moving into the cloud, as an example. If you want to move applications into the cloud, which ones will need a bit of rework and which ones are simply just not good candidates at all. And we can give that kind of information back to customers from a technology set perspective to say,
And do they pay for that, Danie, that first exercise? So if we go in there and you've got 40 apps, where's John? John, I'm answering your question now, where John's saying, so what does it cost and what are the timelines? Well, how long is a piece of string? But let's go. We've got 20 apps that are on-prem. We've got this new bold ambition to expand. What do you do for me, Danie?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. So it's a blended answer. So there's definitely some components of that engagement that is free of charge and that we do with the customers to help them to build their strategy and to help them to build their way of working and so on. So that's free. So that's great. And we work with customers to do that.
You heard it here first.
And then the second part of it is consulting type engagements where we actually bring our consultants to run these applications on premise, and there's a cost for that engagement typically. We call that process the navigate process, so navigate to cloud or navigate to containers or navigate to automation adoption as examples. And the idea there is that we then spend really focused time with the customer for 10 days, or it's typically a 10-day type of engagement with the navigate. And we work through these application modernization issues that the customers have. We do that application portfolio mapping. But we don't just do that. We also look at what the customer wants to achieve, how are they going to do it, what are the current blockers, challenges, and so on that they can address themselves without having to pay us anything, but within their organization to fix some of the ways of working to be more cloud native or to be more cloud ready. So it's a blended answer between some things are free, some things are paid for.
Okay. And just to get back to John, the timeline is really up to you. It's how long is a piece of string? We've got to see what's going on the ground. As a victim of doing many of these, I think the very first thing, Danie, you spoke about was that prioritization and looking at the applications. It's probably the most valuable exercise people can do, and looking at the apps and what they're doing, because a lot of people don't do that. Sorry, I'm not meant to be sharing. It's actually meant to be you and Johan here. Now I want to ask my favorite questions. I'm going to start with Johan and then going to Danie. What's on the horizon for Red Hat in the next 6 months that you are most excited about? And what is the release in your area that affects you, Johan? Then what is your focus for your team in the next quarter? And then last one, for a non-Red Hat customer who may be listening, apart from buying from you and engaging your service, what advice do you have for someone who's considering adopting a transformational strategy in their department? And what are some quick wins that we can look at? Because everyone wants to make an impact. So Johan, you first. What's on the horizon for Red Hat in the next 6 months? And what are you most excited about?
So Dan, what I'm quite excited about is open hybrid cloud. And especially in South Africa, we've seen the hyperscalers come in, AWS and Azure. And when we're talking about a platform availability, to John's question, we obviously spoke about the process. But once you get there, you've got the ability to run this as a managed service in one of your cloud service providers, be it at Microsoft, be it at AWS. So that's quite exciting, and the technologies are there, and they are in South Africa, which is even better. So you don't have to worry about data sovereignty and all that other stuff.
Okay, and you, Danie, what's your most exciting thing coming from Red Hat in the next 6 months?
Probably for me, for the next 6 months, is all of the stuff that we're doing around the edge and building out the edge use cases. And I think that's going to become more and more important in South Africa as we start seeing more 5G rollouts and getting more connectivity out to the different parts of the country. I think the edge side of things is going to become quite important. And then also the interesting things that we're doing around workloads on top of this cloud platform that we're building, right? So if you look at the artificial intelligence and machine learning type use cases that we're starting to see with customers, the event-driven architectures that people are starting to build, using things like streams of data that's coming into the application platform. I think that's the interesting part for me. And there's going to be massive changes in the way that we interact with customers because of this.
Come on, that's exciting. You just missed one, RPA. Johan, what's your team's focus for the next quarter? What is your sales focus? And then Danie, yours.
So Dan, it's obviously assisting customers in getting through this approach. As we said before, for us, it's around what their priorities are and how we can actually help them through this process. That's really our focus, to say, look, guys, how can we help you to get to the next steps?
Clearly, Johan's not quota driven. We want to close stuff. Yeah, Danie, what's your focus for the next quarter?
So it's really helping customers unlock the value that they have in their IT solutions. It's really bringing the business benefit to them. And that's really the focus that I've got. So I'm really driving a lot of these workshops that Johan is talking about. I'm really driving that with customers, helping them to adopt this new way of working and understanding agile, DevOps, and all of these other wonderful things we've been speaking about, understanding that for the organization. So that's my focus for the foreseeable future.
Excellent. For customers that are working in the tech space and are embarking on this, what are some of the quick wins advice that you would give them now, Danie?
So I think some of the quick wins that they can definitely do is start with automation and start building out automation as one of the first things that you do, because there's a lot of value that you unlock with automation. And it's not just automation in one level, it's automation throughout the organization, it's automation throughout the stack. So it's like you said earlier, RPA, which becomes quite important. It's infrastructure automation, it's test and security automation, and all of these other things that you start building into it. So I definitely think a quick win is looking at automation and how you use that. Another quick win that you start looking at with this as well is start what we typically do with organizations. We talk about something called the DevOps Dojo approach. And the DevOps Dojo is a hyper learning experience. The idea there is that you take subject matter experts from the vendors and from your partners and from your own team. You take a simple use case, you learn how to go and develop that simple use case on this new platform. Then you go and you expand that team and you build more teams with these subject matter experts that's now learned how to do it. So it's the coaches teaching the other coaches, and this becomes the viral way in which you deploy this into your organization. So this hyper learning dojo way is easy.
Guys, steal that, make it go. I love that. That's a nice one. Johan?
Adding on to what Danie said, and I think this is more at the business level when we go through this whole process. There's a lot of options out there. And the advice I want to give to people, make sure you've always got a clear exit path. It's not a negative thing. So don't go down a route that you basically paint yourself into a corner. Always make sure you've got an exit strategy. And, focus, once again, business priorities versus, into the weeds. How do we build this thing? And then the last bit is, there is managed services out there to help you get to this. And we definitely can assist customers to sort of get them through the steps to get to those, the last, grabbing that flag and saying, this is what we wanted to achieve.
I think the anti-nuptial contract with accrual is a really, really important one, especially when you're looking at partners. You need to know what the value contribution is that you're expecting from one another. And how do we part ways? I think that's such good wisdom. Tyler has asked, any plans at looking at bringing blockchain technology in? Just a yes or no, and how soon?
So the answer is yes, and it is part of the roadmap for the current and the next release of OpenShift. So definitely it'll be there.
Excellent.
And of course, you can run normal Red Hat Enterprise Linux for a lot of those workloads as well today already. So yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And then Hemu asks, is Red Hat operate in a hybrid cloud environment? Hemu, I'm going to ask Johan to send you, he's giving a very big yes, but just to send that on email to you as a response, because we are out of time. Guys, our hour has flown, and I think the wisdom that I want to summarize that you've given us and shared with us is that this transformation is no longer new. It's been done by a number of people. It's been done right and it's been done wrong. wisdom is learning from other people's mistakes. So if customers want to come, they should come and speak to you about how to get it right. The second thing is that it starts with a cultural shift rather than a technology purchase before we get into this transformation. And the third is that there's lots of help in this environment. In South Africa, in SADC, and globally, they're accessible through Red Hat. It's been a real fun session to facilitate. Johan and Danie, you're always super guests to have on our session. I want to thank you for trusting your journey with me, and I'm going to hand over to Carrie from Tech Central.
Thanks again, guys, for attending today. I really do hope that you found today's session insightful and that we answered some of your questions. Cheers from Tech Central. Stay safe, and we'll see you guys at the next one.